somewhere in the quiet darkness of the night, while entire cities drift into sleep beneath the glow of distant streetlights, millions of human minds continue performing one of the strangest activities in the known universe. Behind closed eyes, hidden beneath blankets and silence, the brain begins building worlds that do not exist. Conversations emerge from nowhere, forgotten faces return with impossible clarity. Time stretches, folds, and dissolves. Entire emotional landscapes appear without warning, and by morning, much of it will already be gone. It is easy to forget how strange this truly is. For nearly 1/3 of your life, you surrender conscious control and enter a state where the boundaries between memory, imagination, emotion, and perception begin to blur together. Modern neuroscience has mapped galaxies, split atoms, and decoded fragments of human DNA. Yet dreams still remain partially hidden in shadow. Even now, scientists cannot fully explain why the brain insists on producing vivid inner experiences during sleep, or why some dreams feel more emotionally real than waking life itself. There is something quietly unsettling about that, especially when you consider that the human brain is never more electrically active than during certain phases of dreaming. In deep REM sleep, the visual centers of the brain illuminate with extraordinary intensity. Emotional systems become highly active, logical regions partially soften their control. The sleeping mind begins weaving fragments of memory, fear, desire, and symbolism into narratives that often make no sense at all, and yet somehow feel meaningful. Psychologists sometimes describe dreams as the language of the subconscious. Neuroscientists prefer more cautious terms. But regardless of interpretation, one fact remains deeply consistent across cultures and centuries. Human beings have always believed that dreams matter. Ancient Egyptians wrote dream manuals over 3,000 years ago, carefully cataloging symbolic visions and possible meanings. In ancient Greece, people traveled to sacred temples specifically designed for dream incubation, hoping sleep itself might deliver healing or prophecy. In medieval Europe, dreams were often treated as messages from divine realms, and long before modern science existed, countless civilizations sensed something peculiar about the sleeping mind, as though consciousness itself changed shape after dark. Tonight, psychologists understand dreams somewhat differently, yet the mystery has not disappeared. In some ways, it has only become deeper, because modern research suggests that while you sleep, your brain is quietly reorganizing reality itself. Throughout the day, your senses collect enormous amounts of information. Tiny facial expressions, background sounds, emotional reactions, fleeting anxieties, random observations you barely notice. But the conscious mind cannot process everything at once, so during sleep, especially during dreaming, the brain begins sorting through the unfinished fragments. Neuroscientists have discovered that memory consolidation often intensifies during sleep. Experiences from the day replay themselves in altered forms. Emotional events receive special attention. Neural pathways strengthen or weaken. The brain edits, organizes, and reshapes experience almost like a film editor working alone through the night. And sometimes, the results appear inside dreams. A stressful conversation may transform into a storm at sea. A childhood memory may quietly reappear decades later without explanation. A small emotional discomfort ignored during waking life may emerge symbolically in sleep with startling intensity. The dreaming brain does not always communicate literally. Instead, it speaks in textures, associations, and emotional echoes. This may explain why dreams often feel strangely familiar, even when their content is impossible. You might dream of a house you have never seen before, yet somehow know exactly where every room leads. You might speak with someone who no longer exists, feeling emotions so vivid that waking up becomes briefly disorienting. In dreams, the brain constructs experiences from emotional logic rather than physical logic. And remarkably, sleeping minds accept these impossible realities with almost no resistance. Psychologists call this diminished critical awareness dream acceptance. During REM sleep, portions of the prefrontal cortex, the area associated with rational analysis and self-monitoring, become less active. As a result, bizarre situations feel entirely normal. Gravity may disappear, time may fracture, entire identities may shift instantly, yet the dream continues unquestioned. In waking life, reality is constantly verified through logic and sensory consistency. In dreams, emotion becomes the primary organizing force, and perhaps that reveals something unexpectedly important about human psychology, because even while awake, people rarely experience the world as pure objective reality. Emotions shape perception constantly. Fear alters memory, loneliness changes interpretation, hope influences attention. The brain is not simply recording reality like a camera. It is constructing an internal experience moment by moment, filtering existence through layers of meaning, expectation, and emotion. Dreaming may simply expose this process more openly. Some researchers believe dreams help regulate emotional balance by allowing the mind to simulate difficult experiences in safer environments. Studies have shown that emotionally intense events are frequently incorporated into dreams within days after they occur. In a sense, the brain may be rehearsing emotional adaptation while the body rests. This becomes especially visible after trauma. People experiencing grief, heartbreak, or anxiety often report unusually vivid dreams, sometimes comforting, sometimes deeply unsettling. During sleep, unresolved emotions continue moving beneath conscious awareness, searching for integration. The dreaming mind appears unwilling to simply ignore emotional tension. Instead, it transforms emotion into imagery, a hallway with no exit, an endless ocean, a train that cannot be stopped, a voice calling from another room. These symbolic dream structures appear across cultures with remarkable consistency. Carl Jung believed such recurring symbols emerged from what he called the collective unconscious, a deeper psychological layer shared across humanity itself. Modern science remains skeptical of some of Jung's broader theories, yet researchers still acknowledge that certain emotional themes appear universally in dreams: falling, being chased, losing teeth, arriving somewhere too late, searching for someone who cannot be found. It is astonishing how many human beings, separated by oceans, languages, and entire civilizations, experience similar dream motifs throughout life. Some psychologists believe these patterns reflect ancient survival instincts embedded deep within the nervous system. Others argue they emerge from common emotional pressures shared by all humans: uncertainty, vulnerability, social fear, attachment, mortality, and perhaps sleep allows those hidden tensions to speak more honestly than waking life ever does. The strange thing is that dreams rarely feel artificial while they are happening. The brain generates entire sensory realities internally: sounds, environments, emotions, even physical sensations, without external input. In essence, every night, the human mind becomes both storyteller and audience simultaneously. And yet most dreams vanish almost immediately after waking. Scientists believe this forgetting process may be linked to neurochemical changes during REM sleep. Levels of certain neurotransmitters involved in stable memory formation become altered, making dreams difficult to store long-term. The result is a curious psychological phenomenon. Humans spend years inside vivid inner worlds they can barely remember. Entire emotional experiences dissolve within minutes of sunrise. There is something hauntingly beautiful about that. A person may carry thousands of forgotten dreams across a lifetime without realizing it. Entire imagined cities may have existed briefly inside the mind, then disappeared forever before breakfast. Conversations with impossible people, landscapes no waking eye has ever seen, emotions never spoken aloud. The sleeping brain creates them, experiences them, and quietly erases them. As midnight deepens and the outside world grows still, this hidden psychological theater continues in silence across the planet. Apartment windows darken one by one. Highways empty. Rain taps softly against distant rooftops, and beneath it all, human minds drift steadily inward, descending once again into one of the oldest mysteries consciousness has ever known. Because the deeper scientists examine sleep and dreaming, the stranger the human mind begins to appear. In laboratories filled with quiet machines and dim blue monitors, researchers sometimes watch sleeping volunteers through the night, as tiny sensors record the electrical rhythms of the brain. From the outside, the sleeper appears motionless, peaceful, disconnected from the world. But inside the skull, enormous activity unfolds invisibly. Neural signals pulse across intricate pathways, emotional centers activate, memories reactivate in fragments. The brain begins performing delicate psychological work that waking consciousness rarely notices. One of the most fascinating discoveries in modern sleep science is that the brain does not fully shut down during sleep. In fact, certain regions become more internally connected than they are during the day. The dreaming mind appears to enter a state that is simultaneously detached from external reality and intensely absorbed in internal simulation. It is almost as though consciousness turns inward and begins exploring itself. This inward exploration may explain why dreams often feel emotionally amplified. A small embarrassment from waking life may become overwhelming inside a dream. A fleeting memory from childhood may suddenly return with astonishing vividness. During sleep, emotional filtering changes. Experiences are no longer restrained by ordinary distractions, schedules, or social expectations. The subconscious mind gains more room to speak, and sometimes it speaks through metaphor with eerie precision. Psychologists have long observed that dreams rarely communicate in straightforward ways. Instead, the sleeping brain transforms abstract feelings into concrete imagery. Anxiety becomes collapsing architecture, emotional distance becomes endless roads, personal uncertainty becomes being lost in unfamiliar buildings. These transformations are not random in the ordinary sense. They emerge from associations stored deep within memory networks. The brain is constantly linking emotions to images, locations, sounds, and experiences. During dreaming, these hidden connections surface freely. This may also explain one of the strangest features of human memory: the fact that forgotten experiences can quietly survive for decades beneath conscious awareness. A scent drifting through the air, a certain kind of evening light, the sound of distant thunder. Without warning, tiny sensory details can unlock emotions and memories that seemed permanently lost. Neuroscientists sometimes describe memory not as a fixed archive, but as a living reconstruction. Every recollection changes slightly when remembered. The brain rebuilds the past each time it revisits it. Dreams appear to participate in this reconstruction process. While sleeping, the mind revisits emotional material repeatedly, reorganizing experiences into broader narratives about identity and meaning. In some cases, this may even influence personality over time. Researchers studying sleep deprivation have discovered that disrupted dreaming can affect emotional regulation, decision-making, and resilience. Without sufficient REM sleep, people often become more reactive, anxious, and emotionally unstable. It suggests that dreaming is not a meaningless side effect of sleep. It may be part of the mind's emotional maintenance system. Curiously, some of history's most important discoveries appear connected to this mysterious nighttime processing. The chemist Auguste Kekulé famously claimed the structure of the benzene molecule came to him in a dream involving a serpent biting its own tail. The composer Paul McCartney once awoke with the melody of Yesterday already formed in his mind. Even mathematicians have reported solutions emerging suddenly after sleep, as though the subconscious had continued working quietly in darkness. Modern neuroscience offers possible explanations for this phenomenon. During sleep, the brain forms unusual associations between distant ideas more freely than during focused waking thought. Logical constraints loosen slightly. Creativity becomes less linear. Information stored in separate neural regions begins interacting in unexpected ways. The dreaming brain, in other words, may be exceptionally good at discovering hidden patterns, and perhaps that is why human beings have always attached mystery to dreams. They reveal that the mind contains processes operating far beyond conscious awareness. Much of human psychology unfolds silently beneath the surface of ordinary thought. Decisions are influenced before people realize it. Emotional reactions emerge before logic catches up. The conscious self may feel central, but neuroscience increasingly suggests it represents only a small, illuminated portion of a much larger mental landscape, like a lantern moving through an enormous, darkened house. Some psychologists believe this hidden mental activity explains why intuition can feel so strangely accurate at times. The brain continuously absorbs subtle information outside conscious attention, micro-expressions, behavioral patterns, emotional cues, environmental changes. During sleep, these fragments may continue combining beneath awareness, occasionally producing sudden feelings or insights upon waking. Not magic, not prophecy, but a form of unconscious pattern recognition so complex it can feel almost supernatural. This becomes particularly interesting when examining recurring dreams. Many people experience dreams that repeat throughout different stages of life. Sometimes the setting changes slightly, yet the emotional structure remains identical. A person keeps searching for something important, keeps arriving too late, keeps wandering through endless unfamiliar rooms. Researchers believe recurring dreams often reflect unresolved psychological tension or persistent emotional themes. The brain revisits them repeatedly because the underlying emotional conflict remains active. In a sense, recurring dreams may function like unfinished conversations between conscious identity and deeper emotional systems, and often, these dreams fade only after something changes internally. A fear is faced, a grief is processed, a life transition quietly settles into acceptance. Then suddenly, the dream disappears forever. There is something deeply human about this invisible relationship between sleep and emotional healing. Long before psychotherapy existed, the mind may have already possessed its own nighttime methods for processing distress, even nightmares. Unsettling as they are, may serve a psychological purpose. Researchers studying fear responses suggest nightmares could help the brain simulate threatening situations in safe environments, rehearsing emotional reactions without real-world danger. From an evolutionary perspective, this might have offered survival advantages. Early humans who mentally practiced threats during dreams may have become more prepared for danger while awake. But nightmares also reveal something emotionally profound. The brain cannot simply erase fear. It must engage with it somehow. And so, throughout the night, the sleeping mind continues constructing symbolic rehearsals of tension, uncertainty, and survival. Sometimes terrifying, sometimes beautiful, sometimes impossible to explain. Yet perhaps the most peaceful psychological fact of all is this: every human being shares this hidden nightly journey. No matter how isolated a person feels during the day, sleep quietly reconnects humanity through common biological rhythms. Across continents and oceans, billions of minds cycle through similar stages of dreaming every night. Emotional memories are processed, fears surface, imaginations wander. The species enters its shared vulnerability together. In hospitals, quiet suburbs, crowded cities, distant villages, ships crossing dark oceans, and apartments glowing faintly against the night sky, human beings close their eyes and disappear temporarily into inner worlds only they can experience. For a few hours, social status dissolves. Schedules disappear. The external performance of identity softens. And beneath the surface of modern civilization, the ancient architecture of the human mind continues its timeless work in darkness, slowly, silently, dreaming itself forward into morning. There is a peculiar moment that sometimes happens just before sleep fully arrives. The body grows heavy against the bed. Thoughts begin losing their sharp edges. Sounds from the outside world drift farther away. And then, for a brief instant, the mind enters a threshold state between waking and dreaming, where reality becomes strangely fluid. Psychologists call this hypnagogia. In this transitional phase, people often experience fleeting images, fragmented voices, drifting sensations, or strange combinations of thoughts that feel both random and deeply meaningful. A person may see geometric patterns floating in darkness, hear a distant name spoken softly, feel the sensation of falling just as sleep begins pulling consciousness downward. Nearly everyone experiences this state, though many forget it immediately. And yet hypnagogia may reveal something remarkable about the structure of consciousness itself. During ordinary waking life, the brain constantly filters incoming information, organizing perception into stable reality. But during the descent into sleep, those filters begin relaxing. The boundaries between memory, imagination, sensation, and subconscious association loosen slightly. The result is a temporary psychological landscape where thoughts behave differently than they do in daylight. This is one reason creative people throughout history have been fascinated by the edge of sleep. The inventor Thomas Edison reportedly held metal balls while resting in a chair, so that when he drifted into sleep, the balls would fall and wake him, allowing him to capture strange thoughts emerging from hypnagogia. The artist Salvador Dalí used similar techniques, believing the transitional state between waking and dreaming contained unusual creative power. Modern neuroscience partially agrees. Studies suggest that during these threshold states, the brain becomes more capable of unusual associative thinking. Distant concepts connect more freely, logical structure softens, internal imagery intensifies. In some ways, the mind becomes temporarily less efficient, but more imaginative, and perhaps this explains why certain thoughts late at night feel so unusually profound. In darkness, without the noise of daily obligations, the brain begins operating differently. Reflection deepens, emotional sensitivity changes, memories surface more easily. Even time itself can feel altered during quiet, sleepless hours. Psychologists have observed that human beings are especially vulnerable to introspection at night. The same mind that navigates the practical demands of daytime suddenly turns inward after sunset. Questions that remain silent during busy afternoons often emerge softly in darkness. What matters most? Why do certain memories stay alive for years? Why do some moments change a person forever while others disappear completely? The night has always amplified these questions, perhaps because human beings evolved under cycles of firelight, darkness, and uncertainty for far longer than under electric light and glowing screens. For most of history, nighttime meant reduced visibility, vulnerability, and reflection. The nervous system may still carry ancient psychological responses to darkness even now. Researchers studying circadian rhythms have discovered that emotional processing shifts throughout the day. Hormone levels fluctuate, alertness changes. Anxiety sensitivity can increase late at night. Thoughts often feel heavier after midnight than they do at noon, even when circumstances remain identical. This is not weakness, it is biology. The brain interprets the world differently depending on internal states, light exposure, fatigue, and emotional exhaustion. A problem that feels unbearable at 2 in the morning may feel manageable after sunrise. Sleep itself acts almost like an emotional recalibration system, gently resetting parts of the nervous system overnight. And this resetting process influences memory in fascinating ways. One of the strangest psychology facts is that human memory is deeply selective. The brain does not preserve experience evenly. Instead, it prioritizes emotionally charged moments, novelty, and meaning. Entire years can blur together in memory, while a single quiet evening from childhood remains permanently vivid. A specific song playing from another room, the texture of rain against a car window, the scent of old books in a silent library. Why do certain moments survive while thousands of others disappear? Scientists believe emotional salience plays a major role. When experiences carry strong emotional weight, the amygdala interacts more intensely with memory systems, strengthening neural encoding. In simple terms, emotion tells the brain, "This matters. Remember this." But memory is not objective. It bends. It reshapes itself over time. And sometimes the mind quietly edits the past without permission. Experiments in cognitive psychology have repeatedly shown how surprisingly fragile memory can be. People can develop false memories through suggestion alone. Entire events may be remembered inaccurately while still feeling completely real. Witnesses confidently misremember details. Childhood recollections shift over decades. The brain fills gaps automatically, constructing coherent stories even when information is incomplete. In a strange way, human identity itself depends partly on carefully maintained narrative illusion, because what people call the self is deeply connected to remembered continuity. The feeling that the person existing now is the same person who existed years ago, yet the body changes constantly. Neural connections reorganize, Beliefs evolve, memories distort, personality shifts slowly over time, and still, consciousness experiences itself as continuous. This quiet illusion may be one of psychology's most beautiful mysteries. Every morning, people awaken carrying an internal story about who they are. But beneath that stable narrative lies enormous psychological fluidity. The human mind is not fixed. It adapts continuously, often invisibly. Even loneliness changes perception. Researchers have found that socially isolated individuals become more sensitive to emotional cues and perceived threats. The brain begins scanning more intensely for signs of rejection or connection. In contrast, feelings of safety and belonging can alter stress responses, sleep quality, immune function, and even life expectancy. Human beings are profoundly psychological creatures. A kind word can remain alive in memory for decades. So can a moment of humiliation. The nervous system records emotional experience with astonishing depth, and perhaps this is why calm environments feel so healing at night. Soft rain, distant thunder, the hum of a fan in a dark room. Gentle ambient sound appears to soothe the brain, partly because predictable sensory patterns reduce vigilance. The nervous system slowly recognizes safety. For ancient humans, complete silence in darkness may once have signaled danger. But stable environmental sounds, wind through trees, steady rainfall, crackling fire, suggested normalcy and survival. Even now, modern brains often relax in response to these ancient acoustic patterns. Some psychologists believe this explains humanity's enduring attraction to nighttime rituals. Reading before bed, quiet conversations, warm drinks, watching storms through windows. These behaviors help guide the nervous system towards psychological decompression after the overstimulation of waking life. Because beneath technology, schedules, and modern civilization, the human brain still longs for rhythms it understands: darkness, warmth, safety, rest. And slowly, as another night deepens outside unseen windows across the world, countless minds begin descending once again towards sleep. Thoughts soften, muscles loosen, memories drift quietly through consciousness like distant lights beneath water. The waking world grows quieter, and somewhere beneath awareness, the dreaming mind patiently waits to begin again. For a brief period each night, just before dreams fully take over, the brain enters one of the most peaceful states found anywhere in human biology. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, muscles release their tension almost one by one. Electrical activity across the nervous system shifts into slower rhythms, as though the entire body is gradually dimming its internal lights. From the outside, sleep appears passive, but internally, it is an astonishing act of coordination. Trillions of cells continue communicating through chemical signals and electrical pulses. Hormones are released with careful timing. Immune systems repair microscopic damage. Neural pathways reorganize themselves. The sleeping body quietly performs maintenance impossible during full wakefulness. And perhaps most remarkably, the brain begins cleaning itself. For decades, scientists struggled to understand how the brain removed waste products generated through normal activity. Unlike the rest of the body, the brain lacks a conventional lymphatic drainage system. The question remained mysterious for years. Then researchers discovered something extraordinary. During deep sleep, spaces between brain cells actually expand slightly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow more freely through neural tissue. This process helps wash away metabolic waste that accumulates throughout the day, including proteins associated with neurological diseases. In other words, sleep does not merely restore the mind psychologically. It may literally cleanse the brain physically. There is something strangely comforting about that image. While a person sleeps beneath blankets in darkness, the brain quietly bathes itself in slow-moving currents invisible to consciousness. Thought dissolves into silence. Memories settle. Cellular repair continues wordlessly through the night. The body remembers how to heal even when the conscious mind lets go. And yet modern humans often resist sleep as though it were an inconvenience. Across much of the industrialized world, rest has gradually become associated with laziness or inefficiency. People boast about functioning on little sleep, Artificial light stretches evenings far beyond natural rhythms. Notifications follow minds into bed. Entire nervous systems remain partially alert long after midnight. But biology has not adapted as quickly as technology. The human brain still evolved for cycles of light and darkness shaped by the sun, not glowing screens and 24-hour stimulation. Researchers studying sleep deprivation consistently find the same pattern. When sleep disappears, the mind begins unraveling in subtle but profound ways. Attention weakens, emotional control becomes fragile, memory deteriorates, anxiety intensifies. Even the perception of reality itself can shift. After prolonged sleep deprivation, healthy individuals may begin experiencing microsleeps, tiny, involuntary lapses into unconsciousness lasting only seconds. Hallucinations can emerge. Emotional reactions become unstable. Cognitive distortions increase. The exhausted brain struggles to maintain coherent awareness. It is a reminder that consciousness itself is biologically delicate. People often imagine the mind as something independent from the body. Yet psychology repeatedly reveals how deeply mental experience depends upon physical rhythms. Hunger alters mood. Hormones influence perception. Sleep shapes emotional resilience. Even optimism and despair can partially fluctuate with nervous system regulation. The boundary between mind and body is far less separate than it appears. This becomes especially visible in dreams involving physical sensations. A distant sound in the room may weave itself into dream narrative. Changes in temperature can subtly influence emotional tone during sleep. Some researchers believe the dreaming brain continuously integrates external sensory information while constructing internal realities, and sometimes those realities become lucid. Lucid dreaming occurs when a person becomes aware they are dreaming while still remaining asleep. For a brief and extraordinary moment, consciousness recognizes the dream state from within the dream itself. Some lucid dreamers report controlling environments, flying through imagined landscapes, or intentionally interacting with dream figures. To neuroscientists, lucid dreaming represents a fascinating hybrid state. Part waking awareness, part dreaming consciousness. Brain imaging studies suggest increased activation in regions associated with self-awareness during lucid dreams, almost as though rational consciousness briefly reawakens inside the dream world. The idea feels almost philosophical, a mind becoming conscious inside its own illusion, and perhaps that mirrors ordinary life more than people realize. Psychology has long explored the possibility that much of human behavior operates automatically beneath conscious awareness. Habits guide actions, biases shape interpretation, emotional conditioning influences decisions before logic intervenes. In many ways, waking life itself contains layers of unconscious programming people rarely notice. To become more self-aware, truly aware, may require recognizing these invisible patterns. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Thousands of years later, psychology continues uncovering how difficult genuine self-examination truly is. Human beings possess remarkable capacities for self-deception. People rationalize behavior instinctively. Memories reshape themselves to protect identity. Contradictions hide quietly beneath conscious thought, yet nighttime often softens these defenses. Lying awake in darkness, many people encounter thoughts they avoid during the day. Regrets surface, old memories return. Unanswered questions emerge quietly from beneath distraction. There is something about silence and darkness that reduces psychological distance between the self and deeper emotion, perhaps because the external world finally grows quiet enough to hear internal life more clearly. And despite all modern distractions, humans still seem drawn toward these reflective nighttime states. Late-night conversations often become more honest than daytime ones. Emotional vulnerability increases after midnight. Philosophical thinking deepens. Even strangers sometimes reveal personal truths more easily beneath dim light and exhaustion. Researchers studying social psychology have noticed this phenomenon repeatedly. Environmental conditions influence emotional openness. Soft lighting, reduced noise, physical stillness, and nighttime fatigue all appear capable of lowering certain psychological barriers. In simpler terms, The human mind becomes gentler at night, less guarded, less performative, more reflective. Maybe this is why so many people throughout history have associated nighttime with wisdom, creativity, and introspection. Monks prayed before dawn, writers worked through candlelit hours, astronomers studied silent skies, philosophers walked alone beneath stars asking questions too large for ordinary daylight conversation. And overhead, the universe itself offered perspective. The average human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Yet even that astonishing complexity exists on a tiny planet orbiting an ordinary star inside a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of other stars. Modern astronomy reveals scales so enormous that the human mind struggles to comprehend them fully. Still, every night, consciousness looks upward and wonders. That may be one of the most beautiful psychological facts of all. Human beings are creatures capable of experiencing awe, and awe changes the mind in measurable ways. Studies suggest that moments of awe, whether triggered by nature, music, art, or vast ideas, can reduce stress, soften self-focus, and increase feelings of connection. Under star-filled skies or inside deep silence, personal worries sometimes shrink temporarily against larger existence. The nervous system relaxes, thought slows, perspective widens, and perhaps this is one hidden reason why nighttime can feel so strangely peaceful despite its darkness. Because in the quiet hours, removed from the speed of ordinary life, the mind sometimes remembers that it belongs not only to schedules and obligations, but also to mystery. Mystery has always surrounded the human mind, partly because consciousness itself remains difficult to define. Every person experiences thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations continuously, yet science still cannot fully explain how subjective awareness emerges from physical matter. Billions of neurons exchange electrical signals inside the brain, but somewhere within that activity appears the private experience of being alive. The color blue, the feeling of nostalgia, the ache of loneliness, the warmth of relief. These experiences exist internally, invisible to everyone except the person feeling them. Neuroscientists can observe patterns of brain activity associated with emotion, but the actual texture of conscious experience, what philosophers sometimes call qualia, remains deeply mysterious, and perhaps nowhere does consciousness become stranger than in the moments between sleeping and waking. There are mornings when dreams linger briefly after the eyes open, hanging softly at the edges of awareness like fog dissolving in sunlight. A feeling remains, though the narrative has vanished. Sometimes only an emotion survives. Sadness without context, comfort without explanation, a strange sense that something important was almost understood moments before waking. Then it fades. The conscious mind reaches for it, but the dream slips away. Psychologists believe this fading may occur because dreaming and waking consciousness encode memory differently. Dreams often rely more heavily on emotional and sensory association than on structured narrative logic. Upon waking, the brain rapidly shifts back toward externally oriented thinking, making fragile dream memories difficult to stabilize. In a sense, dreams belong to a different psychological language, and perhaps that is why they feel so elusive. Human beings naturally seek coherent stories. The brain constantly organizes experience into understandable narratives. This tendency is so strong that psychologists sometimes refer to the mind as a meaning-making machine. Even random events are often interpreted through patterns and emotional significance. Clouds become shapes, coincidences become signs, memories become personal mythology. The mind dislikes chaos. It searches relentlessly for structure. This tendency toward meaning-making has shaped religion, philosophy, art, and science across human history. Faced with uncertainty, the brain attempts to build explanations. Some explanations become myths, others become scientific theories. Both emerge from the same deeply human impulse, the desire to understand existence. And yet psychology reveals something humbling. People are often far less rational than they believe. Cognitive biases influence decisions constantly, usually without awareness. The brain uses shortcuts called heuristics to navigate overwhelming amounts of information efficiently. Most of the time, these shortcuts are useful, but they also distort perception in subtle ways. For example, The availability heuristic causes people to overestimate the likelihood of events that are emotionally vivid or easily remembered. After hearing dramatic news stories, individuals may feel certain dangers are more common than they truly are. Confirmation bias encourages people to notice information supporting existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. The brain, remarkably intelligent as it is, evolved more for survival than perfect objectivity, and survival often depends on emotion. Fear sharpens attention. Attachment strengthens social bonds. Hope sustains endurance during uncertainty. From an evolutionary perspective, emotional thinking was not a flaw. It was adaptive. Human beings survived not simply because they reasoned, but because they cared, bonded, feared, remembered, and imagined. Even anxiety itself may partly originate from ancient survival systems designed to anticipate danger before it arrived. The modern world may look very different from prehistoric landscapes, but the nervous system still carries old biological instincts shaped over immense stretches of time. This creates an unusual tension inside modern psychology. The brain evolved for environments filled with immediate physical threats, close social groups, and natural rhythms. But contemporary life surrounds people with abstract pressures the nervous system struggles to interpret properly. Endless information, digital overstimulation, social comparison, artificial light, financial uncertainty. As a result, many minds remain partially activated long after danger has disappeared. Thoughts continue racing in dark bedrooms. Stress lingers invisibly inside the body. The nervous system forgets how to rest, and perhaps this explains why genuinely quiet moments feel increasingly valuable now. Silence allows the brain to recover from constant input. Nature reduces cognitive overload. Sleep restores emotional balance. Solitude creates space for reflection. Researchers studying attention restoration theory have found that natural environments appear especially calming for the human mind because they engage attention gently rather than aggressively. Forests, rainfall, oceans, and starlit skies hold awareness softly instead of demanding it forcefully. The nervous system relaxes into these environments almost instinctively, maybe because somewhere deep inside, the brain still recognizes them as familiar. This familiarity may also explain humanity's enduring emotional connection to firelight. Studies suggest that watching slow-moving flames can reduce blood pressure and encourage relaxation. Long before electric light existed, human beings gathered around fires at night for warmth, protection, storytelling, and social connection. Around ancient fires, psychology itself may have evolved. Language developed, myths emerged, families bonded, fears were shared beneath darkness. Even now, something about flickering light still affects the mind gently. Candles soften rooms, campfires quiet conversation naturally. The brain seems drawn toward rhythmic, predictable sensory patterns that signal calm and safety changes consciousness profoundly. When the nervous system feels safe, attention broadens, creativity improves, empathy increases. The body exits defensive states. In contrast, chronic fear narrows perception towards survival-focused thinking. This is why emotional safety matters so deeply in human relationships. People often remember not exactly what others said, but how those interactions made them feel internally. A calm presence can lower stress responses. Genuine listening can reduce loneliness. Small moments of emotional warmth may influence psychological well-being more than dramatic gestures. The human brain is exquisitely social. Even during sleep, this remains true. Researchers have discovered that feelings of social connection influence dreaming itself. People who feel isolated often report more negative dream patterns, while emotional security correlates with calmer sleep experiences. The sleeping mind continues processing relationships long after conversations end, perhaps because, from an evolutionary perspective, social belonging once meant survival. To be accepted by the group was safety, to be abandoned was danger, and traces of those ancient emotional systems still move quietly beneath modern consciousness today. This may be why loneliness feels physically painful. Brain imaging studies show that social rejection activates some of the same neural regions associated with physical pain. The mind experiences emotional disconnection not as abstract discomfort, but as a biological threat. Yet there is another side to this sensitivity. Human beings are also capable of extraordinary emotional resilience. People recover from loss, adapt to change, rebuild meaning after devastation. Psychology calls this phenomenon post-traumatic growth, the ability for suffering under certain conditions to deepen appreciation, empathy, or perspective over time. Not because pain is beautiful, but because consciousness is adaptive, the mind bends without always breaking. And somewhere tonight, as millions of people drift quietly towards sleep once more, countless invisible psychological stories continue unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary life. Memories settle softly into darkness, emotional wounds continue healing in silence. Dreams prepare themselves patiently beyond awareness, and through it all, the mysterious human mind keeps searching for meaning, for rest, for understanding, and perhaps above all, for a sense of peace within the vast quietness of existence itself. Peace, psychologically speaking, is not simply the absence of noise or conflict. Researchers increasingly believe it emerges from a subtle sense of internal coherence, the feeling that mind, body, and environment are no longer pulling in different directions. Moments of peace often occur when attention settles fully into the present without resistance. This sounds simple, yet for the human brain, it is surprisingly rare. Most waking thoughts drift constantly between memory and anticipation. The mind revisits old conversations, predicts possible futures, rehearses imaginary scenarios, and analyzes unresolved situations endlessly. Cognitive scientists sometimes describe this as the default mode network, a collection of brain regions associated with self-reflection, autobiographical memory, and internal narrative. When external demands fade, this network often becomes more active. The brain begins wandering through time. A person sitting quietly in a dark room may suddenly remember an awkward moment from 10 years earlier. An unfinished conversation resurfaces unexpectedly. Thoughts leap forward into tomorrow's uncertainties. Consciousness drifts backward and forward almost automatically. And perhaps this is why true stillness feels so unusual. To exist fully in one moment without being pulled elsewhere is psychologically difficult for most people. The human mind evolved partly through prediction. Anticipating danger helped survival. Remembering mistakes prevented repetition. But these same systems can produce endless mental restlessness inside modern life. At night, this restlessness sometimes becomes more visible. Without daytime distraction, the internal voice grows louder. Some people replay entire conversations before sleep. Others imagine alternate versions of their lives, wondering what might have happened if different choices had been made. The quiet darkness becomes a mirror for consciousness itself. Psychologists refer to this tendency as counterfactual thinking, the mind's habit of constructing imagined alternatives to reality. If only I had said something different. If only I had stayed. If only I had left sooner. These imagined timelines can generate regret, relief, gratitude, or sorrow depending on the memory involved. Interestingly, researchers believe counterfactual thinking may serve adaptive purposes. By imagining different outcomes, the brain learns from experience and prepares for future decisions. But there is also something profoundly emotional about it. Human beings are creatures capable of imagining lives they never lived, and sometimes those imagined lives remain emotionally real for years. A different city, a lost relationship, a path never taken. The brain quietly carries these unrealized possibilities alongside actual memory, blending reality with imagination in ways that shape identity itself. This blending becomes even more fascinating when considering how humans perceive time psychologically. Objective clock time moves steadily forward, yet subjective time behaves unpredictably. Certain hours feel endless, entire years vanish quickly in retrospect. Childhood summers once seemed infinite, while adulthood often accelerates strangely with age. Why does this happen? One theory suggests that novel experiences create richer memory encoding, making periods feel longer in hindsight. Childhood contains constant novelty, first discoveries, unfamiliar environments, rapid learning. Adult routines, by contrast, often become repetitive, causing memory to compress large stretches of time together. The brain measures life partly through change. This may explain why emotionally significant moments appear to slow time temporarily. During accidents, fear, awe, or intense focus, many people report altered time perception. The brain increases attention density, creating the feeling that moments expand internally, and dreams distort time even further. A dream lasting only minutes may seem emotionally enormous. Entire journeys unfold during brief periods of REM sleep. The dreaming brain constructs experiences untethered from ordinary temporal structure. Past, present, and imagined future blend together freely. Perhaps consciousness was never designed to experience time objectively at all. Instead, the mind experiences time emotionally. A lonely evening stretches. A joyful night disappears instantly. Grief freezes memory. Anticipation speeds the heart before events even arrive. Human beings do not merely observe reality. They experience it through deeply subjective psychological filters shaped by emotion, biology, memory, and attention. And yet, despite this subjectivity, people spend much of life searching for certainty about identity, about purpose, about the future. But psychology repeatedly reveals how fluid human perception truly is. Opinions shift gradually. Beliefs evolve through experience. Personality itself changes more across decades than most people expect. Even the sense of self may be less stable than it appears. Some neuroscientists argue that the self is not a single fixed entity but an ongoing construction generated by the brain moment by moment, a continuous process rather than a permanent object. In quieter hours, this idea can feel strangely unsettling and strangely liberating, because if identity is partly fluid, then change remains possible. Emotional pain can soften, fear can lessen. New meaning can emerge even after difficult chapters of life. The nervous system retains remarkable adaptability throughout human existence. This adaptability appears everywhere in psychology. People become accustomed to enormous changes over time. New environments, relationships, routines, even losses once thought unbearable. Researchers call part of this process hedonic adaptation, the tendency for emotional states to gradually return toward baseline after positive or negative events. The human mind adjusts continuously. A dream home eventually becomes ordinary. A painful ending slowly becomes memory. The extraordinary becomes familiar, and hidden within this adaptation is one of the most peaceful truths in psychology. Emotions are temporary by nature. Even powerful emotional states move like weather systems through consciousness. Anxiety rises and falls. Sadness changes shape over time. Joy arrives unexpectedly. No internal state remains perfectly fixed forever. The night itself reflects this rhythm. Darkness deepens gradually. Silence settles. Then eventually, almost imperceptibly, morning begins returning. For most of human history, people experienced these cycles intimately. Artificial light could not fully erase night. Seasons shaped emotional life more directly. Winter encouraged stillness. Summer extended activity late into evening. The nervous system evolved alongside these environmental rhythms for thousands of generations. Even now, traces remain. Researchers studying seasonal mood patterns have observed how strongly light exposure influences emotional regulation, energy, and sleep. Sunlight affects serotonin production. Darkness influences melatonin release. The brain continuously responds to environmental cycles whether people consciously notice or not. Perhaps this is one reason moonlit nights feel emotionally different from fluorescent rooms. Natural darkness carries softness, depth, space for reflection. Modern life often fills every quiet moment with stimulation, yet the mind appears to need periods of gentle emptiness. Daydreaming, wandering thought, restful silence. These states allow the brain to integrate experience rather than endlessly react to new input. And sometimes, in the deepest quiet hours, people encounter a rare psychological feeling that is difficult to describe precisely. Not happiness, not excitement, something calmer, a sense of existing peacefully within the vastness of life, without needing immediate answers. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once wrote that the ability to endure uncertainty is essential for wisdom. Psychology increasingly supports this idea. Emotional resilience often depends less on controlling life completely and more on learning to coexist with uncertainty without constant fear. Because existence has always contained mystery, the future remains unwritten. Dreams remain partly unexplained. Consciousness itself continues unfolding silently inside billions of sleeping minds tonight. And somewhere beyond windows darkened by midnight, beneath clouds drifting slowly across unseen stars, the ancient human brain continues doing what it has always done, searching softly through memory, emotion, imagination, and darkness for meaning gentle enough to carry into another morning. Morning, when it finally arrives, rarely feels as dramatic as people imagine it will during sleepless nights. Problems that seemed enormous at 3 in the morning often soften slightly beneath daylight. Thoughts regain structure, emotional intensity decreases, the world becomes more manageable again. This quiet emotional reset is one of the most overlooked psychological functions of sleep. During healthy sleep cycles, the brain appears to separate emotional charge from certain memories, allowing people to recall experiences with less distress the following day. Researchers have found that sleep, especially REM sleep, may help reduce the intensity of emotional reactions while preserving informational content. In simple terms, the mind remembers, but hurts a little less. Perhaps this is why the phrase "sleep on it" has survived across generations. Long before neuroscience existed, people sensed that time spent sleeping could transform perspective itself. Decisions made in exhaustion often become clearer after rest. Emotional conflicts soften, solutions emerge unexpectedly upon waking. The sleeping brain continues working quietly even when consciousness disappears, and sometimes it works with astonishing subtlety. There are cases in psychology where individuals struggling with difficult emotional questions gradually discover clarity not through sudden revelation, but through tiny emotional shifts occurring over weeks of sleep, reflection, and memory processing. Healing often happens invisibly long before it becomes consciously noticeable. A person laughs genuinely again without realizing when the sadness began loosening. A painful memory stops appearing every night. A sense of heaviness quietly becomes lighter. The nervous system recalibrates slowly beneath awareness. Human beings often expect emotional change to feel dramatic. Yet psychologically, transformation is frequently quiet. The mind adapts in small increments, almost imperceptibly, until one day a person realizes they no longer react the same way they once did. This gradual change reflects an important truth about the brain. Neural pathways are not fixed. Through experience, attention, repetition, and emotion, the nervous system continuously reshapes itself. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong ability to reorganize and adapt. Every habit strengthens certain pathways. Every repeated thought reinforces patterns. Every new experience leaves traces. Even now, while listening quietly in darkness, the brain is changing slightly in response to attention itself. There is something deeply hopeful about this. The human mind is not carved permanently into one form. Fear can weaken, compassion can deepen, perspective can widen. People are capable of learning emotional responses they once believed impossible. And strangely enough, some of the most powerful psychological changes occur not through force, but through gentleness, a calm environment, consistent rest, supportive relationships, moments of safety repeated over time. The nervous system learns from atmosphere as much as from events. Children raised in emotionally stable environments often develop different stress responses than those raised in unpredictability. Adults exposed to chronic tension may remain physiologically alert long after danger disappears. The body remembers emotional environments with remarkable sensitivity. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional conditioning. Over time, the brain associates certain places, sounds, people, or situations with emotional states automatically. A familiar song triggers nostalgia. Rain evokes calm. A certain hallway revives anxiety from years earlier. Memory lives not only in thought, but in sensation. And nowhere is this more visible than in the phenomenon known as emotional flashback. Unlike ordinary memory, emotional flashbacks can recreate feelings from the past, without clear visual recollection. A person suddenly feels small, afraid, or lonely without fully understanding why. The nervous system has remembered an emotional pattern before the conscious mind identifies its source. Yet the opposite is also true. Safety leaves traces. Comfort leaves traces. Kindness leaves traces. A peaceful evening remembered years later may still calm the mind unexpectedly. The brain stores emotional refuge just as deeply as emotional pain. Perhaps this explains why certain nighttime memories remain so vivid across an entire lifetime. Sitting quietly beside someone during a storm, falling asleep to distant conversation from another room, watching snow through a window under dim light. These moments often contain no dramatic event at all, yet psychologically, they become anchors of safety and stillness. The mind treasures emotional atmosphere, and maybe that is why human beings have always created rituals around sleep. Bedtime stories, evening prayers, soft music, candlelight, shared silence. Across cultures and centuries, people developed ways of guiding the nervous system gently from wakefulness into rest, not merely to sleep, but to feel safe enough to sleep. This distinction matters more than it first appears, because deep rest requires trust. The body must believe, at least temporarily, that vigilance is no longer necessary. Muscles loosen only when the nervous system stops anticipating threat. The mind drifts fully into sleep only when it senses enough safety to release conscious control. And releasing control is one of the hardest psychological acts for human beings. People cling to plans, routines, predictions, and explanations partly because uncertainty feels dangerous to the brain. Yet sleep requires surrender every single night. Consciousness disappears for hours without guarantees, and still people close their eyes willingly. There is something quietly profound about that daily act of trust. Each night, humanity rehearses letting go. Thoughts dissolve. Identity softens. The carefully maintained sense of self fades into dreaming, and by morning, consciousness returns again as though resurfacing from deep water. No wonder ancient cultures treated sleep as mysterious. Even today, scientists cannot fully explain why subjective awareness vanishes and reappears so seamlessly. Consciousness remains one of the deepest unanswered questions in science and philosophy alike. What exactly is the experience of being aware? Why does matter arranged in certain biological forms produce inner experience at all? And why does that experience feel so continuous despite constant interruption through sleep? These questions remain suspended in uncertainty, somewhere between neuroscience and philosophy, waiting quietly in the darkness beyond current understanding. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to disappear completely. Perhaps the human mind needs a few unanswered questions in order to remain curious, reflective, and humble before existence itself. Late at night, especially in silence, people often sense this intuitively. Beneath routines and responsibilities lies an awareness of something larger, not necessarily supernatural, but deeply expansive, a recognition that consciousness is strange, fragile, and astonishing. Tiny electrical storms inside the brain somehow create love, memory, imagination, grief, music, dreams, longing, and wonder. The fact that this happens at all is extraordinary. And tonight, while cities grow quieter and distant rooms slowly darken one by one, millions of minds continue drifting gently toward sleep beneath the same vast sky. Some carry worries into darkness, others carry hope. Many simply carry exhaustion. Yet inside every sleeping brain, ancient rhythms continue patiently. Breathing slows, thought softens, dreams begin gathering in silence, and somewhere, hidden beneath the endless movement of human life, the mind continues its timeless search for peace, understanding, connection, and rest beneath the quiet mystery of the night. Night has a way of reducing the world to essentials. In daylight, attention scatters across responsibilities, notifications, conversations, movement, and noise. But after midnight, much of that falls away. Streets empty, buildings darken, voices disappear into distance. The external world loosens its grip on awareness, and the mind begins listening more carefully to itself. This may be one reason insomnia feels so psychologically powerful. When people cannot sleep, they are left alone with uninterrupted consciousness for hours at a time. Thoughts repeat more loudly in silence. Small worries expand. Time stretches strangely. A clock glowing softly at 2:17 in the morning can feel emotionally heavier than the same moment during daylight. Researchers studying insomnia have discovered that sleeplessness is not merely the absence of sleep. It often involves a state called hyperarousal, where the nervous system remains physiologically activated even when the body is exhausted. Stress hormones linger. Thoughts continue cycling. The brain behaves as though some unresolved danger still requires attention. In ancient environments, this state may once have protected survival. A person sleeping in unsafe conditions needed the capacity to awaken quickly at unfamiliar sounds or subtle threats, but in modern life, the nervous system sometimes activates without visible danger at all. An unanswered message, financial uncertainty, loneliness, anticipation, regret. The body responds to psychological stress with many of the same biological systems once reserved for physical danger. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, cortisol rises, attention narrows, the mind scans constantly for resolution. And unfortunately, the harder people try to force sleep, the more elusive it often becomes. Psychologists sometimes call this the paradox of sleep effort. Sleep arrives most naturally when control softens. Trying aggressively to make oneself sleep can increase alertness instead. The brain begins monitoring itself, evaluating whether sleep is happening quickly enough, creating even more mental activation. It is one of the strange contradictions of human psychology. Rest often appears only when pursuit relaxes. The same pattern exists in many emotional experiences. Happiness pursued directly can feel artificial. Creativity forced under pressure may disappear. Calmness demanded aggressively becomes impossible. Certain mental states emerge more easily through allowing than controlling. And perhaps this is why peaceful nighttime rituals matter so deeply. Dim light, quiet reading, soft rain sounds, familiar routines. These signals help guide the nervous system away from vigilance and toward surrender. Over time, the brain begins associating these patterns with safety and rest. Human beings are creatures of association. A single melody can transport someone emotionally across decades. A childhood scent can return with startling clarity after years of absence. Even specific temperatures or seasons can awaken moods stored quietly in memory. Autumn often evokes reflection. Winter encourages stillness. Summer nights carry openness and movement. The brain absorbs environmental patterns continuously, attaching emotion to atmosphere in ways people rarely notice consciously. This emotional relationship with atmosphere may explain why certain places feel psychologically restorative, even without obvious reason. A quiet library, a room lit softly at night, snow falling outside a window. These environments reduce sensory overload while providing gentle structure for attention. The nervous system relaxes into predictable calm, and in those calmer states, perception changes subtly. Researchers have found that anxious minds tend to interpret ambiguity negatively, while relaxed minds perceive the same uncertainty more neutrally or optimistically. In other words, emotional state influences reality interpretation constantly. A stranger's silence may feel threatening during anxiety and peaceful during calm. Rain may seem lonely to one person and comforting to another. The external world remains the same, but the psychological lens changes. This realization can feel strangely liberating. Much of human suffering emerges not only from events themselves, but from the mind's relationship to those events. Cognitive psychology explores this deeply. Thoughts influence emotions. Interpretations shape experience. Internal narratives affect perception continuously. Yet, the mind often treats its own thoughts as unquestionable truth. A passing worry becomes certainty. A temporary emotion becomes identity. A fear becomes prophecy. Psychologists refer to this tendency as cognitive fusion, becoming so entangled with thoughts that they feel inseparable from reality itself. But thoughts are often transient mental events, not objective facts. This is easier to notice late at night. In darkness, thoughts drift across consciousness almost like weather patterns. Some fade quickly, others linger. Certain memories return repeatedly for reasons not entirely understood. The mind revisits unresolved experiences the way the ocean revisits shorelines endlessly. And perhaps this repetition serves a purpose, because psychologically repetition strengthens importance. The brain rehearses what it believes matters emotionally. This is why recurring worries become deeply ingrained, but also why repeated kindness, gratitude, and safety can gradually reshape emotional patterns over time. Attention itself changes the brain. What people repeatedly focus on influences neural structure through experience-dependent plasticity. Chronic fear reinforces vigilance pathways. Repeated calm strengthens regulation systems. The nervous system learns from mental habits continuously. In this sense, every night becomes part of psychological architecture. Each evening either deepens exhaustion or restores balance. Each period of rest influences emotional resilience for the following day. Sleep is not empty time passing in darkness. It is active biological and psychological restoration occurring quietly beneath awareness. And still, despite all scientific understanding, sleep retains something ancient and sacred feeling, perhaps because it reminds people of vulnerability. No one remains fully in control during sleep. Titles disappear. Productivity stops. Conscious identity softens into dreaming. For several hours, every human being becomes suspended between awareness and oblivion, trusting the body to continue breathing automatically through darkness. There is humility in that. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote that humanity's greatest problems arise from the inability to sit quietly alone in a room. Modern psychology suggests there may be truth hidden inside that observation. Silence confronts people with themselves directly. Without distraction, unresolved emotions often emerge naturally. But silence also contains healing possibilities. In quiet moments, the nervous system can finally slow enough to process experiences rather than merely react to them. Reflection becomes possible. Emotional integration deepens. Perspective widens. This may be why some of humanity's most profound realizations occur during solitary nighttime hours. Not because darkness creates wisdom automatically, but because darkness removes enough noise for deeper thought to surface. Outside, the world continues turning silently through space. Oceans move beneath moonlight. Clouds drift over sleeping cities. Somewhere, rain taps softly against glass while another mind lies awake listening. Elsewhere, someone finally drifts into sleep after a difficult day, their breathing slowly settling into rhythm. And across the planet, countless dreaming minds continue building temporary inner worlds that will vanish by morning. Invisible theaters of memory and imagination. Private universes experienced once and forgotten forever. The human brain creates these worlds endlessly, night after night, across entire lifetimes. Most disappear without record. Yet together they form one of the largest hidden landscapes in existence. The vast, unremembered interior life of humanity, a silent ocean of dreams beneath the surface of the sleeping world. If every dream humanity has ever experienced could somehow be gathered into one place, it would form an archive stranger than any library ever built. Billions upon billions of fleeting inner worlds, forgotten conversations, impossible landscapes, moments of fear, wonder, grief, desire, nostalgia, confusion, and beauty experienced only once before dissolving into darkness forever. Most of those dreams have already vanished completely, and yet for a brief time, they were real to the minds experiencing them. This raises an unusually philosophical question hidden inside psychology. What makes an experience meaningful? If a dream feels emotionally real in the moment but disappears afterward, did it matter less than waking life? The brain responded to it. The body reacted emotionally. Fear accelerated the heartbeat. Joy created warmth. Sadness lingered after waking. In some sense, the mind experiences imagined reality biologically as reality. Neuroscientists often point out that the brain does not directly experience the outside world itself. Instead, it interprets electrical signals generated by sensory input, constructing an internal model of reality moment by moment. Vision, sound, touch, taste, and smell are all transformed into neural patterns before becoming conscious experience, which means that every human being lives partly inside a carefully constructed simulation generated by the brain. Usually, this simulation corresponds closely enough with external reality to function effectively. But dreams reveal how easily the mind can generate entire experiences internally without outside input at all, and that realization has fascinated thinkers for centuries. The philosopher René Descartes famously questioned how anyone could prove they were not dreaming at any given moment. Modern neuroscience approaches the issue differently, but the deeper mystery remains surprisingly relevant. Consciousness experiences internally generated realities constantly, often without realizing it. Memories are reconstructions. Expectations alter perception. Emotions reshape interpretation. The mind continuously edits experience from within. Perhaps this is why two people can live through the same event and remember it entirely differently years later. Psychology repeatedly demonstrates that memory is not a perfect recording device. It is dynamic, emotional, selective, and deeply influenced by meaning. A childhood home remembered fondly by one sibling may feel lonely to another. A quiet winter evening may become comforting nostalgia for one person and sadness for someone else. Experience does not exist separately from interpretation, and interpretation changes over time. This fluidity can feel unsettling at first, but it also reveals something compassionate about human psychology. People are not trapped entirely by their past experiences. Meaning itself can evolve. Memories once associated with pain may soften into wisdom or tenderness decades later. The brain continuously rewrites emotional context. This process becomes particularly visible when studying nostalgia. For a long time, nostalgia was considered a kind of emotional weakness or unhealthy longing for the past. But modern psychologists increasingly view it differently. Nostalgia often serves important emotional functions, strengthening identity, increasing feelings of connection, and helping people maintain continuity during difficult transitions. Curiously, nostalgic memories are rarely exact recreations of the past. Instead, they often preserve emotional atmosphere more than objective detail. The glow of streetlights during childhood winters, the sound of distant television from another room, the feeling of safety before falling asleep as rain moved softly outside. These memories survive partly because they carry emotional texture, not because every factual detail remains accurate. The mind remembers how moments felt, and perhaps this explains why sensory experiences can awaken memories so powerfully. Smell, especially, possesses unusually strong neurological connections to emotional memory systems. A forgotten scent can suddenly reopen entire emotional worlds from decades earlier with startling intensity. Researchers call this the Proust phenomenon, named after the writer Marcel Proust, who famously described memories flooding back after tasting a small cake dipped in tea. Neuroscience later confirmed that olfactory processing connects closely to brain regions involved in emotion and memory. The result is almost magical. A scent travels invisibly through air, enters the nervous system, and unlocks fragments of identity hidden for years. The human mind is filled with these invisible doorways. Music functions similarly. A melody heard after many years can instantly restore emotional states connected to another period of life. Not merely thoughts about the past, but genuine emotional echoes from it. Heart rate shifts, mood changes, forgotten feelings return. The brain stores experience in networks of association, and during quiet nighttime hours, these networks often become more active. Without daytime distraction, old memories drift upward more easily. Certain songs feel deeper after midnight. Reflection intensifies. Emotional subtlety becomes easier to notice. Psychologists sometimes refer to nighttime as a period of lowered cognitive interference. With fewer external demands competing for attention, internal thought grows more vivid. This may partly explain why creativity, introspection, and emotional sensitivity often increase late at night. There is also less performance at night. During the day, people manage roles constantly. Employee, parent, student, partner, friend. Social expectations shape behavior continuously, but in solitude and darkness, much of that performance relaxes temporarily. A person alone at night often encounters a more private version of themselves, sometimes gentler, sometimes lonelier, sometimes more honest. And perhaps this honesty is psychologically important. The mind cannot suppress emotion forever without cost. Thoughts pushed away repeatedly often return later with greater intensity. Researchers studying emotional suppression have found that avoiding feelings entirely can increase stress rather than reduce it. The nervous system continues carrying unresolved emotional material beneath awareness. Sleep and dreaming may partly function as release valves for this hidden psychological pressure. The dreaming brain allows strange combinations of memory, emotion, and symbolism to emerge safely. Not always clearly, not always pleasantly, but honestly in ways waking life sometimes avoids. A dream about losing direction may reflect uncertainty never spoken aloud. A recurring image of home may symbolize emotional safety. An endless staircase may represent striving without resolution. The dreaming mind communicates emotionally before it communicates logically, and perhaps this emotional language feels universal because human beings share so many underlying psychological structures despite outward differences. Everyone experiences fear eventually. Everyone experiences longing, uncertainty, attachment, loss, hope. Cultures vary enormously, but the emotional architecture of the nervous system remains deeply connected across humanity. Tonight, countless people lie asleep, carrying invisible emotional worlds no one else fully sees. Someone dreams of childhood. Someone dreams of escape. Someone dreams of a person they miss. Someone experiences peaceful sleep for the first time in weeks. And somewhere else, another mind lies awake staring softly into darkness, listening to distant sounds while thoughts move slowly through consciousness like drifting clouds. This hidden interior life exists everywhere simultaneously, beneath the visible structure of civilization, behind apartment windows, inside quiet suburban homes, on trains crossing dark landscapes, in hospital rooms glowing faintly blue, across ships moving silently through oceans beneath stars. The psychological life of humanity continues endlessly through the night. Private, vulnerable, mysterious, and profoundly human. And still, beneath all scientific explanation, consciousness remains astonishing. That matter arranged into biological form can produce dreams, memories, emotions, imagination, and awareness at all is perhaps the strangest fact the universe has yet revealed. Perhaps this is why human beings have always looked upward at the night sky with a mixture of curiosity and quiet unease. Somewhere deep within consciousness is the awareness that existence itself is improbable beyond comprehension. A small planet turning silently through darkness somehow produced oceans, forests, storms, music, language, memory, longing, and minds capable of wondering about their own existence. And every night, those minds temporarily disappear into sleep. It is remarkable how ordinary this feels, despite how strange it truly is. For several hours each night, awareness dissolves almost completely. The sense of self that feels so continuous during the day fades into fragmented dreams and unconsciousness. Yet people rarely fear this daily disappearance. Sleep arrives so naturally that most never stop to question how extraordinary it is that consciousness repeatedly vanishes and returns. Psychologists sometimes compare waking up to a kind of reconstruction process. Each morning, the brain rapidly restores identity. Memories reconnect, orientation returns, personality reassembles itself almost instantly. Within seconds, people remember who they are, where they are, what concerns them, what year it is. But during deep sleep, much of that narrative temporarily disappears. The philosopher John Locke once suggested that personal identity depends heavily upon continuity of memory. Modern neuroscience complicates this idea further. Memory is fragmented, reconstructive, and incomplete, yet consciousness still experiences itself as stable. The brain creates a continuous sense of I, even though thoughts, cells, emotions, and perceptions constantly change. In some ways, the self resembles a story being continuously rewritten, not a fixed object, a process. This process becomes especially visible during major life transitions. A person at 50 may barely resemble who they were at 15, psychologically speaking. Values shift, relationships alter perception. Pain changes priorities. Experience reshapes emotional understanding. Yet beneath all these transformations remains the persistent feeling of being fundamentally oneself. The mind preserves continuity through narrative, and stories matter deeply to human psychology. Long before written language existed, early humans likely gathered around fires sharing stories beneath darkness. These stories transmitted survival knowledge, social values, emotional meaning, and collective memory across generations. Neuroscientists now believe storytelling activates multiple regions of the brain simultaneously, creating unusually immersive emotional engagement. Humans are not only rational creatures, they are narrative creatures. People understand life through sequences, symbols, and emotional arcs. Even memory itself tends to organize experience into story-like structures. This may explain why unresolved events linger psychologically. The brain dislikes incomplete narratives. Emotional closure often involves integrating difficult experiences into broader understanding. Dreams sometimes behave similarly. Many dreams feel unfinished because the subconscious mind itself may still be processing unresolved emotional material. The dream repeats because the emotional narrative remains incomplete, and occasionally, after major emotional shifts in waking life, those dreams disappear quietly forever, almost as though the mind has finished telling itself that particular story. There is something profoundly intimate about this hidden dialogue between waking consciousness and the deeper emotional mind. Much of human psychology unfolds silently beneath ordinary awareness. Beneath every calm expression may exist enormous, unseen complexity. Memories, fears, hopes, regrets, private dreams no one else fully knows. And yet, despite this isolation of inner experience, human beings remain deeply interconnected psychologically. Emotions spread socially through subtle signals constantly. A calm person can soothe a tense room. Anxiety can ripple through groups invisibly. Laughter becomes contagious. Fear travels quickly through crowds. Neuroscientists partly explain this through mirror neuron systems and emotional contagion, the brain's tendency to internally simulate the emotional states of others. The nervous system is always listening. This sensitivity likely evolved because social awareness was essential for survival. Reading emotional cues helped early humans predict danger, maintain alliances, and strengthen group cohesion. Even now, modern brains continuously monitor facial expressions, vocal tone, posture, and micro-behaviors, often without conscious awareness. And interestingly, much of this emotional communication becomes softer and more noticeable at night. Late-night conversations often contain a different emotional texture than daytime interactions. People speak more slowly, defenses lower slightly. Silence becomes more acceptable between sentences. There is less urgency to perform certainty. Perhaps darkness encourages honesty because it reduces distraction, or perhaps exhaustion simply weakens the psychological energy required to maintain masks. Either way, nighttime frequently reveals emotional truths hidden during daylight. This may be why certain memories become permanently attached to nighttime settings. Sitting awake with someone during difficult conversations, quiet laughter in dim kitchens long after midnight, watching city lights silently from car windows. Human beings often remember these subdued emotional moments more vividly than louder events. The brain values emotional authenticity, and maybe authenticity itself feels easier in darkness, because the world grows less demanding there. Researchers studying attention and cognition have found that overstimulation exhausts the nervous system over time. Endless decision-making, noise, information, and social interaction consume cognitive resources continuously throughout the day. Quiet nighttime environments provide relief from this overload. In silence, the brain begins restoring balance. Thought slows naturally. Breathing deepens. Awareness widens beyond immediate demands. And somewhere inside these calmer states, people often rediscover perspective. A problem dominating attention during the afternoon may appear smaller beneath stars. Emotional wounds soften slightly in quiet reflection. The nervous system remembers that existence contains more than urgency and pressure. There is immense psychological value in this widening of perspective. Studies on awe, contemplation, and exposure to nature consistently show reductions in stress and self-focused rumination. Vast environments, oceans, mountains, night skies, remind the brain that individual worries exist within larger reality. Not irrelevant, but smaller, more temporary. This shift can feel deeply calming, perhaps because the human mind was never designed to carry constant hyperfocus indefinitely. Attention needs rhythm. Effort requires rest. Consciousness itself seems healthiest when balanced between engagement and stillness. Night provides part of that balance naturally. Darkness slows activity. Sleep restores cognition. Dreams process emotion, and morning returns awareness gradually to the external world again. It is an ancient cycle repeated endlessly across every human life. Children fall asleep, clutching imaginary worlds. Teenagers stare thoughtfully at ceilings, wondering who they will become. Adults carry exhaustion and responsibility into darkness each night. Elderly minds drift through memories stretching across decades. And through every stage of life, the sleeping brain continues its quiet work beneath awareness, reorganizing memory, regulating emotion, constructing dreams, preserving identity, and guiding fragile consciousness gently through another night. Outside, the world keeps turning soundlessly through space. Clouds move over oceans unseen. Streetlights hum softly against empty roads. Somewhere, distant thunder rolls across sleeping cities, and beneath it all, billions of human minds continue floating through darkness together, dreaming, remembering, forgetting, healing, wondering, and slowly surrendering once more to the peaceful mystery of sleep. There is a moment in nearly every human life when a person realizes that memory alone cannot fully preserve time. No matter how meaningful an experience feels in the moment, it eventually begins drifting away. Faces blur slightly. Voices fade. Entire years compress into fragments. The mind holds onto emotional impressions, while details quietly dissolve at the edges. Psychologists sometimes describe memory as less like storage and more like reconstruction. Each time a person remembers something, the brain rebuilds the experience from scattered neural traces rather than replaying a perfect recording. And during that rebuilding, subtle changes occur. Emotion reshapes emphasis. Later experiences influence interpretation. Certain details strengthen while others disappear completely. In this sense, the past is never entirely fixed. It continues changing gently inside the mind. This realization can feel bittersweet at night, especially during reflective hours when old memories return unexpectedly. A person lying awake may suddenly remember a room from childhood with astonishing clarity. The sound of distant rain, the dim glow of hallway light beneath a door, the feeling of safety before sleep. Yet at the same time, entire conversations from that same year may be gone forever. The brain preserves atmosphere more faithfully than precision, and perhaps that is because emotion matters more to human psychology than exact detail. The nervous system evolved not to archive life perfectly, but to retain what carried emotional significance for survival and meaning. Still, there is something haunting about how quickly ordinary life disappears into memory. Most moments are never noticed as important while they are happening. A quiet evening drive, a familiar voice saying goodnight, the smell of books in a dim room. Only years later does the mind realize those moments had been quietly shaping emotional identity all along. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as retrospective emotional meaning. Certain experiences gain significance gradually over time rather than immediately. The brain continues integrating life long after events themselves have passed, and perhaps sleep plays a role in this process too. Night after night, the mind revisits fragments of experience, slowly deciding what becomes emotionally central and what fades away. Dreams may be part of this invisible sorting system, a theater where memory, emotion, and identity negotiate quietly in darkness. The philosopher William James once described consciousness as a stream, continuously flowing and changing. Modern neuroscience supports this image more than early scientists might have expected. Thoughts emerge and vanish constantly. Emotional states fluctuate. Attention shifts from moment to moment. The self feels stable partly because memory stitches these changing experiences into continuity. Yet beneath that continuity lies constant movement. No thought lasts forever. No emotion remains exactly the same. Even suffering evolves over time. This is one of the gentlest truths psychology offers. Emotional pain often feels permanent while it is happening. Yet the nervous system continues adapting beneath awareness. Grief changes shape, fear loses intensity, memories soften around the edges. Healing rarely happens suddenly, but quietly, through repetition, sleep, time, and gradual emotional integration. Human beings are far more psychologically resilient than they often realize. Not invulnerable, but adaptive. The brain continuously searches for equilibrium even after disruption. Researchers studying resilience have found that people possess remarkable capacities to rebuild emotional stability following loss, uncertainty, or trauma, especially when connection, meaning, and rest remain available, and meaning matters deeply. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed that human beings can endure extraordinary suffering when they retain some sense of meaning or purpose. Modern psychology increasingly agrees. Emotional well-being depends not only on pleasure or success, but on coherence, the feeling that life, however imperfect, still carries significance. Sometimes that significance comes from relationships, sometimes from creativity, sometimes from simple moments of peace experienced quietly in ordinary life. A warm room during rain, a calm conversation before sleep, the sound of wind through trees at night. These experiences may appear small externally, yet psychologically they can become profound sources of emotional grounding. The nervous system responds strongly to safety, familiarity, and gentle sensory environments. This is partly why nighttime routines become emotionally powerful over years. The brain begins associating certain patterns with comfort and restoration. Soft blankets, dim lighting, familiar sounds, repeated experiences gradually build emotional architecture inside the mind, and perhaps this explains why disruptions to sleep can feel so destabilizing emotionally. Without adequate rest, emotional regulation weakens. Minor problems appear overwhelming, patience decreases, the brain struggles to process stress efficiently. Sleep protects psychological balance more than most people realize. During dreaming, emotional memories become reorganized. During deep sleep, physical restoration intensifies. Hormonal systems recalibrate. Neural connections strengthen or weaken depending on recent experience. The sleeping brain is astonishingly active behind its outward stillness. And still, despite all scientific explanations, sleep retains an almost sacred feeling in human culture. Parents watch sleeping children with unusual tenderness. Writers describe midnight as a threshold between worlds. Artists paint moonlit solitude with emotional reverence, perhaps because sleep reveals vulnerability so clearly. A sleeping person cannot fully defend themselves, perform identity, or maintain social masks. In sleep, human beings return to something more elemental, breathing bodies suspended in darkness, trusting unconscious rhythms to carry them safely toward morning. There is humility in that shared condition. No matter how powerful, intelligent, wealthy, or accomplished someone becomes, eventually fatigue arrives. The body slows, consciousness softens, the mind drifts toward dreams like every human mind before it, and dreams themselves remain beautifully democratic. Everyone dreams. Children invent impossible creatures in sleep. Scientists experience symbolic emotional narratives. Artists wander surreal, imagined landscapes. Ordinary people revisit memories long forgotten. The sleeping brain belongs partly to mystery, regardless of status or education. This universality may be why dreams continue fascinating humanity across centuries. They remind people that beneath civilization and technology lies something ancient and deeply human, an inner world beyond full conscious control. And perhaps complete control was never the goal of consciousness anyway. Psychology increasingly suggests that emotional health depends not on dominating every thought or feeling, but on learning how to coexist with internal experience more gently. Thoughts arise, emotions move through awareness, Memories return and fade. The mind behaves less like a machine to command, and more like weather passing through a living landscape. Night makes this easier to notice. Lying quietly in darkness, thoughts drift naturally without constant interruption. Some disappear immediately, others linger softly. The brain continues generating stories, associations, questions, and reflections even as sleep approaches. Outside, somewhere beyond walls and windows, the planet turns steadily through cold space beneath silent stars. Entire oceans rise and fall with tides. Forests move in nighttime wind, cities pulse faintly with distant light, and inside millions of quiet rooms across the world, consciousness slowly dims once more. Breathing steadies. Dreams gather patiently at the edges of awareness. The nervous system releases another day, and the strange, beautiful human mind continues floating gently through darkness, carrying its memories, emotions, fears, hopes, and unanswered questions into sleep beneath the endless calm of the night. Somewhere between memory and imagination exists a psychological space that human beings visit constantly without fully noticing. It appears during daydreams, late-night reflections, drifting thoughts during long drives, and quiet moments before sleep. The mind slips away from immediate surroundings and begins constructing internal worlds from fragments of emotion, memory, possibility, and desire. Neuroscientists once assumed these wandering mental states represented distraction or inefficiency, but modern research suggests something far more interesting. The wandering mind may actually play a central role in creativity, emotional processing, future planning, and identity formation. Even in apparent stillness, the brain remains deeply active. A person staring silently through a window may appear inactive externally while internally reconstructing the past, rehearsing future conversations, imagining alternate outcomes, or reflecting on unresolved emotions. The mind rarely stays completely still for long. Consciousness moves naturally through associations like water flowing across connected landscapes. And perhaps this constant inner movement explains why solitude can feel either peaceful or overwhelming depending on emotional state. For some people, quiet becomes relief. For others, it becomes confrontation. Without external distraction, unresolved thoughts often emerge more clearly. The nervous system brings unfinished emotional material toward awareness repeatedly, almost as though the mind is attempting to complete internal patterns that remain unresolved. Psychologists sometimes call this the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for incomplete tasks or unresolved experiences to remain more psychologically active than finished ones. The brain dislikes unfinished tension. It keeps certain thoughts circulating because closure has not yet arrived. This may partly explain why old conversations replay themselves late at night, or why people continue mentally revisiting moments from years earlier, searching for understanding, forgiveness, or meaning. The emotional mind seeks completion, yet not every question receives an answer, and learning to live beside uncertainty may be one of the most important psychological skills human beings ever develop. Children naturally assume the world contains clear explanations for everything, but adulthood gradually reveals something quieter and more complicated. Some losses remain unresolved. Some mysteries remain unanswered. Some emotions never fit neatly into language. Still, the mind continues searching. Perhaps that search itself is deeply human. The psychologist Carl Rogers believed people possess an innate tendency toward growth and integration, what he called the actualizing tendency. Beneath confusion, fear, and emotional conflict, the mind continues moving slowly toward coherence whenever conditions allow safety, honesty, and reflection. And reflection changes people more than they often realize. A single quiet realization late at night can alter behavior for years afterward. Sometimes emotional transformation does not arrive dramatically, but through small moments of clarity experienced in silence. A person suddenly understands their own loneliness, or recognizes how exhausted they have become, or realizes they are no longer angry after carrying resentment for years. These internal shifts often happen softly, without witnesses. The human mind changes in private, long before the external world notices. Sleep may help these changes settle more deeply into consciousness. During rest, The brain integrates emotional learning gradually. Experiences reorganize themselves into broader narratives about identity and meaning. New perspectives strengthen through repetition. Emotional intensity decreases enough for reflection to become possible. It is almost as though the mind needs darkness in order to process light, and perhaps this is why nighttime has always inspired philosophy. Across centuries, thinkers, poets, scientists, and ordinary people alike have found themselves contemplating existence more deeply after sunset. Darkness simplifies the external world. Fewer distractions compete for attention. Consciousness turns inward naturally. Questions emerge. What does it mean to live well? Why do certain moments stay with us forever? Why does beauty affect the mind so deeply? Psychology cannot answer all of these questions completely, but it offers fascinating clues. Human beings appear biologically sensitive to beauty because beauty often signals harmony, safety, meaning, or emotional resonance. Symmetry pleases perception. Music organizes emotional rhythm. Natural landscapes calm attention systems shaped through evolution. But beauty also seems to carry something beyond utility. A quiet snowfall at night serves no direct survival purpose for modern humans, yet many people experience profound emotional stillness while watching it. The brain responds not only to survival needs, but to atmosphere, symbolism, memory, and awe. Perhaps consciousness itself longs for experiences larger than immediate practicality. This longing becomes especially visible in humanity's relationship with the stars. For thousands of years, people lay awake beneath dark skies, watching distant constellations move slowly overhead. Long before astronomy became science, the night sky already shaped mythology, navigation, spirituality, and emotional imagination. Even now, many people report feeling calmer or more reflective beneath stars than beneath artificial ceilings. Researchers studying awe suggest that vast environments reduce excessive self-focus and increase feelings of connection to larger existence. Looking upward at immense darkness filled with distant light changes perspective psychologically. Personal worries shrink slightly against cosmic scale, not because human problems are meaningless, but because the mind briefly remembers it belongs to something far larger than daily tension. This perspective can feel deeply restful. Modern life often traps attention inside constant urgency, messages, deadlines, noise, stimulation. Yet the nervous system appears to need periods of spaciousness where thought can widen naturally, rather than remain compressed by pressure. Night provides this spaciousness. Darkness slows visual stimulation. Silence reduces cognitive demand. Sleep restores mental equilibrium, and dreams reopen the imagination. Perhaps dreams themselves are part of how the mind protects psychological flexibility. In dreams, impossible combinations become temporarily acceptable. Logic softens. Identity shifts. The brain experiments freely with emotion and imagery beyond ordinary constraints. Some neuroscientists believe this flexibility may help emotional adaptation by allowing the mind to explore possibilities unconstrained by waking rules. The dreaming brain becomes less rigid, more associative, more open to unusual emotional integration, and maybe this is why dreams sometimes feel wiser than waking thought, not because they predict the future, but because they bypass some of the defenses, habits, and rational filters that shape ordinary consciousness. A dream may reveal fear more honestly than daylight reasoning, or longing, or grief, or hope. The subconscious mind speaks quietly, often symbolically, but persistently, and still, by morning, much of it disappears. The human brain generates extraordinary inner worlds every night, only to erase most traces before breakfast. Entire emotional universes vanish silently with sunrise. There is something strangely tender about that, a reminder that not everything meaningful must remain permanent to matter. Some experiences exist only briefly: a dream before waking, a conversation beneath dim light, the peaceful silence after rain. Yet these moments still shape the nervous system, leaving emotional traces that continue long afterward. Tonight, somewhere in darkness, countless people are already drifting towards sleep once again. Some carry heavy thoughts, others carry quiet contentment. Many are simply tired from the invisible effort of being human, and beneath the surface of their resting minds Ancient biological rhythms continue faithfully, neurons firing softly, memories reorganizing, emotions settling, dreams gathering like distant weather beyond awareness. The night holds them gently for a while, and the mind, mysterious as ever, continues dreaming forward through the darkness toward another uncertain, beautiful morning. Morning eventually arrives for everyone, though rarely all at once. First, there is the faintest shift in darkness, almost impossible to notice at first. The room remains quiet, shadows soften slightly. Somewhere outside, distant birds begin calling into the pale blue edge of dawn, and slowly, the sleeping world begins returning to consciousness. For the brain, waking is not instantaneous. Neuroscientists describe it as a gradual reactivation process involving multiple systems restoring alertness and orientation. Hormones shift, body temperature rises, sensory awareness sharpens, conscious thought begins reorganizing itself around identity, memory, and immediate surroundings. And perhaps this is why the moments just after waking can feel strangely delicate. For a few brief seconds, the mind exists between worlds. Dreams still linger faintly, while reality reassembles itself piece by piece. Some mornings feel peaceful, others carry unexplained emotional residue from the night before, traces of dreams already dissolving beyond recall. Psychologists sometimes refer to this emotional carryover as dream effect. Even after dream narratives disappear, emotional impressions may remain active inside the nervous system. A person may wake feeling calm, unsettled, nostalgic, relieved, or melancholic, without fully knowing why. The subconscious mind leaves echoes behind, and in quiet mornings, those echoes can feel surprisingly profound. Perhaps this is because consciousness itself is more layered than people often assume. Beneath ordinary thought exists an enormous hidden architecture of emotional processing, memory integration, instinct, association, and symbolic meaning. Much of what shapes human experience happens outside deliberate awareness, yet people still tend to identify almost entirely with conscious thought. I think, therefore I am. But psychology complicates this simple idea. Thoughts arise automatically much of the time. Emotions influence reasoning before logic fully engages. Habits guide behavior unconsciously. The conscious self may function less like a commander and more like a narrator attempting to interpret deeper processes already unfolding beneath awareness. This realization can feel unsettling at first and strangely comforting afterward, because it suggests that not every thought deserves absolute trust. Worries are not always predictions. Fear is not always truth. Temporary emotional states are not permanent definitions of identity. The mind generates countless internal experiences continuously, many of which pass naturally when given time, rest, and perspective. Nighttime often reveals this most clearly. A thought that feels catastrophic at 2 in the morning may seem manageable after sleep. Emotional intensity changes with biological state. Fatigue alters perception. Hormones influence mood. The nervous system affects consciousness constantly. Human beings are not detached observers floating above biology. They are living systems deeply connected to rhythm, chemistry, memory, and environment. Even sunlight changes psychology. Morning light entering the eyes helps regulate circadian rhythms, influencing alertness, mood, and hormonal balance. Researchers have found that regular exposure to natural daylight improves sleep quality, emotional regulation, and cognitive performance. The brain evolved under patterns of sunrise and darkness for thousands of generations. Modern life often disrupts those patterns quietly. Artificial light extends wakefulness deep into the night. Screens stimulate attention systems long after exhaustion begins. Entire nervous systems remain partially activated around the clock. Yet beneath all modern technology, ancient biological rhythms continue asking for balance, rest, darkness, recovery. Human beings often imagine strength as constant productivity, but psychology increasingly suggests something gentler. Sustainable well-being depends on cycles. Effort requires restoration. Attention requires stillness. Emotional resilience depends partly on the ability to recover, not merely endure. Nature itself operates through rhythm. Tides rise and fall. Seasons change slowly. The heart contracts and releases continuously. Even breathing depends on alternation. Inhale, exhale, tension, release. Perhaps consciousness also requires rhythm to remain healthy. Wakefulness and dreaming, connection and solitude, thinking and silence, movement and rest. When these rhythms become severely disrupted, the mind begins signaling imbalance through anxiety, exhaustion, irritability, numbness, or emotional fragmentation. The nervous system cannot remain permanently accelerated without consequence, and yet modern culture often encourages precisely that condition. Faster communication, more stimulation, endless comparison, constant availability. The brain absorbs all of this quietly. Attention fragments, rest becomes shallow, thought grows noisy. Many people move through life without realizing how overstimulated their nervous systems have become, until they finally experience genuine quiet again. Then suddenly, silence feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable at first. But after enough time, the mind begins remembering something older beneath the noise. A slower psychological rhythm carried through human history long before digital life existed. Nightfall, firelight, conversation fading softly into darkness, the body preparing gradually for sleep. Perhaps this is why calm nighttime environments continue affecting people so deeply even now. Rain against windows, wind moving through distant trees, the low hum of nighttime silence. These experiences reconnect the nervous system to patterns it still instinctively recognizes as safe and natural. And safety changes everything psychologically. When the brain no longer believes it must remain vigilant constantly, creativity expands, reflection deepens, empathy increases. Sleep becomes restorative rather than restless. Emotional healing accelerates. The nervous system begins trusting the world enough to rest inside it again. This trust may be one of the rarest emotional experiences in modern life. To feel genuinely safe, not merely physically safe, but psychologically safe, free for a moment from performance, urgency, fear, and pressure. Sleep offers fragments of this every night when conditions allow. The mind loosens its grip on control. Muscles soften. Breathing steadies, conscious identity fades gradually into dreams, and in those hours, the brain continues performing ancient restorative work in darkness, exactly as it has across human history. Generations before electricity, before cities, before written language, human beings already dreamed beneath stars. Ancient minds feared storms, loved families, grieved losses, imagined futures, and searched for meaning just as modern minds do now. Technology changed the world dramatically, but the emotional architecture of consciousness remains astonishingly familiar across centuries. People still long for connection, still fear uncertainty, still remember childhood, still lie awake wondering about existence beneath the quiet of night. Perhaps this continuity explains why psychological truths discovered thousands of years ago still resonate today. Philosophers, storytellers, and spiritual traditions repeatedly emphasized presence, balance, reflection, compassion, and acceptance long before neuroscience could study them scientifically. The language changes. The biology becomes clearer, but the emotional realities remain deeply human. And somewhere tonight, while another cycle of darkness settles gently across the world, countless people are beginning their own slow descent towards sleep again. Some will dream vividly. Others will drift through silent unconsciousness. Many will awaken tomorrow remembering nothing at all from the night. Yet beneath awareness, the mind will continue its patient work regardless, sorting memory, regulating emotion, restoring balance, dreaming quietly beneath the endless movement of stars overhead. And in the great invisible theater of sleeping humanity, consciousness will once again dissolve into mystery, only to return softly with morning light, carrying another day of thought, feeling, wonder, and fragile human awareness into the world again. Awareness itself may be the most intimate phenomenon human beings will ever encounter, and yet it remains strangely difficult to examine directly. People can study galaxies through telescopes and cells through microscopes, but consciousness observes everything from inside itself. The mind is both the observer and the thing being observed. Perhaps that is why self-understanding is so complicated. A person may spend years believing they understand themselves completely, only to discover hidden fears, desires, or motivations quietly influencing behavior beneath awareness the entire time. Psychology repeatedly reveals how much of mental life operates invisibly. Habits form automatically. Emotional reactions emerge before conscious reasoning catches up. Memories shape decisions without announcing themselves. And still, despite these hidden forces, human beings continue trying to know themselves more clearly. Late at night, this desire often becomes stronger. There is something about darkness that encourages introspection. Without constant visual stimulation, attention naturally turns inward. Thoughts drift more slowly. Emotional subtleties become easier to notice. People begin asking questions they avoid during busy hours. Am I happy? What am I searching for? Why do certain memories still hurt? The mind circles these questions quietly, sometimes for years, and perhaps the answers matter less than the act of reflecting itself. Psychologists studying meaning and well-being increasingly suggest that emotional health depends partly on self-awareness, the ability to observe thoughts and feelings without becoming completely consumed by them. This does not mean eliminating emotion or controlling every thought. It means developing enough inner stillness to recognize that thoughts, feelings, and identities remain fluid rather than absolute. The mind changes continuously. Even now, new neural connections are forming in response to experience. Memories are being subtly rewritten. Emotional associations are shifting. The brain is alive with adaptation every moment, though most of it occurs silently beneath awareness. This quiet adaptability may explain why people sometimes feel unexpectedly different after certain nights. A long conversation changes perspective. A dream reveals hidden emotion. Hours of reflection soften old resentment. Sleep itself reorganizes emotional weight invisibly, and by morning, something internal has shifted slightly, not dramatically, just enough. Human transformation often happens in increments too small to notice immediately. Looking back years later, a person realizes they no longer think, fear, or hope exactly as they once did. Identity evolves slowly through accumulated experience, memory, relationships, and reflection. The philosopher Heraclitus once observed that no person steps into the same river twice because both the river and the person have changed. Modern psychology would likely agree. Consciousness is movement. Emotion is movement. Life itself unfolds through continuous change whether people resist it or not. Yet despite constant change, the mind longs for stability. Familiar places comfort people. Routines calm the nervous system. Repeated rituals create emotional grounding. There is deep psychological wisdom in this. The brain evolved to conserve energy by recognizing predictable patterns. Familiarity reduces uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty often lowers stress responses. This is why nighttime rituals feel soothing across cultures. They create structure around vulnerability. A favorite blanket, a familiar lamp glowing softly, the sound of pages turning before sleep. These small patterns tell the nervous system, you are safe enough to rest now, and safety allows consciousness to soften. Perhaps this is one hidden reason why loneliness can feel so heavy at night. Darkness naturally increases introspection, and without emotional connection, thoughts may echo more intensely in solitude. Researchers have consistently found that social belonging strongly influences emotional regulation, sleep quality, and even physical health. The human mind is deeply relational. People become themselves partly through connection with others. A calm voice can regulate anxiety. Gentle presence can ease emotional pain. Even silent companionship changes nervous system activity measurably. This may explain why some of the most comforting memories involve simply existing quietly beside another person without needing words. Sitting together during rain, falling asleep while hearing someone moving softly in another room, watching distant lights in silence during long nighttime drives. The brain remembers emotional safety with extraordinary precision, and sometimes, years later, those memories return unexpectedly during quiet nights. Not necessarily with sadness, sometimes with gratitude. sometimes with longing, sometimes simply with the awareness that certain moments mattered far more than they seemed at the time. Psychologists call this emotional salience, the tendency for emotionally meaningful experiences to remain vivid in memory. But emotional meaning itself often emerges slowly. A moment becomes precious partly because it cannot be repeated exactly again. Time changes everything gently. Children grow older. Cities transform. Voices disappear. Entire phases of life eventually become memory. Yet consciousness continues moving forward, carrying traces of all these experiences inside itself. There is something beautiful about that invisible continuity. Every person becomes a living archive of remembered emotions, forgotten dreams, sensory fragments, and internal stories stretching across decades. Much of this inner world remains private forever. Even close relationships can never fully reveal the complete landscape of another mind, and perhaps that mystery between people is part of what makes human connection so profound. Every conversation occurs between two consciousnesses carrying entire hidden histories beneath the surface. Fears unspoken, dreams unfinished, memories impossible to fully communicate. Still, people try, through language, through art, through music, through quiet, late-night conversations when honesty arrives more easily than usual. The need to be understood may be one of the deepest psychological drives of all. Not merely noticed, understood. To feel that another mind recognizes something real beneath appearance and performance. And maybe sleep itself offers a temporary release from the endless effort of explanation. During dreaming, identity becomes fluid. Social roles disappear. The subconscious mind wanders freely through memory and imagination without needing to justify itself logically. Dreams rarely care about status or productivity. They care about emotion. Fear appears symbolically. Desire reshapes reality. Loss revisits old landscapes. Hope invents impossible futures. The dreaming mind speaks in emotional truths more than rational structures. And each morning, most of those dreams dissolve almost completely, leaving behind only faint impressions, a feeling, an image, a mood already fading beneath daylight. Yet perhaps forgetting is necessary too. The mind cannot carry every dream permanently any more than it can preserve every waking moment forever. Consciousness survives partly through selection, letting certain experiences settle into memory while allowing others to drift away, like waves smoothing patterns into sand. Outside, another night stretches quietly across the world. Somewhere, rain moves slowly across rooftops. Somewhere else, insomnia keeps a solitary mind awake beside dim blue light. Elsewhere, a child drifts peacefully into dreams without fear, held gently by sleep's ancient rhythm. And beneath it all, humanity continues its endless invisible journey through consciousness, thinking, dreaming, remembering, forgetting, searching softly through darkness for meaning, comfort, connection, and rest beneath the quiet mystery of existence itself. Existence becomes easier to carry when the mind stops demanding perfect certainty from it. This may be one of the quiet lessons hidden inside psychology. Though people often spend years discovering it gradually, the brain naturally searches for clear answers, stable outcomes, and predictable patterns because uncertainty activates ancient survival systems. But life rarely offers complete clarity for long. Relationships change, plans dissolve, memories fade, even the self evolves continuously over time. And perhaps emotional peace depends less on controlling these changes than on learning how to move with them gently. Nighttime often reveals this truth more honestly than daytime. In darkness, stripped of much of the external noise that fills waking hours, people sometimes sense how temporary everything really is. Not in a frightening way necessarily, but in a deeply human one. A certain season of life ends quietly. A friendship slowly becomes memory. A room once filled with conversation grows silent forever. Yet somehow consciousness continues forward, carrying emotional traces of each experience into new chapters. The mind is always becoming. Psychologists studying identity development have found that people tend to imagine their current selves as more finished and permanent than they truly are. Researchers call this the end of history illusion, the tendency to underestimate how much personality, values, and perspective will continue changing in the future. A person at 20 imagines they will remain mostly the same. Then at 40, they barely recognize some of their former certainties. And at 60, entire emotional landscapes may have transformed again. Still, throughout all these changes, people preserve a continuous feeling of selfhood. The narrative adapts. New memories attach themselves to old identity structures. Consciousness weaves continuity from constant movement. There is something almost dreamlike about that process. Perhaps this is why old photographs can feel so emotionally strange. A person looks at an earlier version of themselves and recognizes both familiarity and distance simultaneously. The face is recognizable, but the inner world connected to that moment may feel impossibly far away now. Entire emotional realities once felt permanent. Now they survive only as memory. And yet those earlier selves still exist indirectly inside the present mind, influencing habits, fears, hopes, and emotional reactions in ways too subtle to fully measure. Psychology sometimes describes this as emotional layering. Human beings do not simply replace old identities completely. Instead, experiences accumulate gradually, creating deeper psychological complexity over time. Childhood remains hidden inside adulthood. Past griefs influence future tenderness. Old fears shape new caution. Earlier joys become emotional reference points for later life. The mind carries its history everywhere quietly. This is one reason certain places can feel emotionally charged even years later. Returning to a childhood street, an old classroom, or a familiar room often produces strange emotional reactions difficult to explain logically. The brain reconnects present awareness with stored emotional associations from earlier life. Suddenly, time feels less linear. The past becomes psychologically present again for a moment. Researchers studying autobiographical memory have found that emotionally significant locations activate rich networks of sensory and emotional recall. A hallway smell, the angle of evening light, distant sounds from another room. These details can awaken forgotten layers of identity almost instantly. Human consciousness is deeply tied to place, and nighttime intensifies this connection. Cities feel psychologically different after dark. Familiar streets become quieter, more reflective. Empty train stations carry melancholy beauty. Apartment windows glowing softly against darkness suggest countless unseen lives unfolding simultaneously behind walls. Perhaps this is why people often feel more aware of other human beings at night, even in solitude. Looking across a city after midnight, it becomes easier to imagine the invisible emotional lives surrounding you. Someone reading quietly before sleep, someone grieving privately in darkness, someone laughing softly during a late conversation, someone unable to stop thinking long enough to rest. The hidden psychological world of humanity continues everywhere at once beneath the surface of ordinary life. And despite how isolated people sometimes feel, these emotional experiences remain profoundly shared. Fear, longing, nostalgia, uncertainty, hope. The forms differ, but the emotional architecture repeats across individuals endlessly. This shared vulnerability may be one of the deepest truths psychology reveals. Every person you pass carries an invisible inner world as emotionally real and complicated as your own. Entire histories hidden behind calm expressions. Dreams no one else fully knows. Memories carried silently for decades. The mind contains oceans beneath its surface. Perhaps recognizing this is part of what creates compassion. When people remember that others are also struggling with uncertainty, loneliness, exhaustion, or hidden emotional burdens, harshness softens slightly. The illusion that everyone else possesses perfect certainty begins dissolving. In reality, most human beings are improvising their way through existence more than they admit, and maybe that is perfectly natural. After all, consciousness itself arrived inside a universe already in motion. No one receives a complete explanation beforehand. People learn gradually through experience, reflection, failure, love, loss, memory, and time. The nervous system adapts continuously to changing emotional landscapes. Some nights feel peaceful, others feel unbearably heavy, yet both eventually pass. This rhythm of passing may be one of the most comforting psychological realities available to human beings. Emotions move, thoughts change, Life continues unfolding even after periods that once seemed impossible to survive. The brain was built not only to feel deeply, but to recover gradually. And recovery often happens invisibly. A person sleeping peacefully after months of anxiety may not realize how much healing already occurred beneath awareness. Emotional wounds close slowly through rest, safety, connection, and time. The nervous system relearns calm through repeated experience. Sleep becomes part of this healing rhythm every night. During dreams, memories reorganize. During deep sleep, stress systems quiet slightly. During rest, exhausted minds regain enough balance to continue. There is something profoundly gentle about the fact that the human body keeps trying to restore equilibrium automatically even during periods of emotional struggle. Breathing continues. Cells repair themselves. Neural systems recalibrate. Consciousness drifts temporarily away from worry into darkness where restoration quietly unfolds. And perhaps this is why people often describe peaceful sleep as feeling almost sacred after difficult periods of life. Not dramatic happiness, just relief, softness, a temporary absence of internal struggle. Tonight, somewhere beneath rain clouds, stars, city lights, and silent suburban streets, millions of people are moving gradually toward that state once again. Beds creak softly in dark rooms, thoughts slow, eyes close, memories loosen their grip slightly. Some minds will wander through vivid dreams, others will sink into deep, silent unconsciousness. Many will awaken tomorrow, carrying no memory of the night at all. Yet beneath awareness, the ancient work of the mind will continue faithfully through darkness, balancing emotion, preserving identity, restoring the nervous system, and guiding fragile human consciousness gently through another turning of the earth beneath the endless quiet of the universe.